Welcome to the cross in the desert, speaking hope and freedom to Iran. I'm Randy L. Noble, so very glad that you've taken aside a few minutes of your busy time and your busy schedule to spend it with me. Well, the subtitle of my video program is Speaking Hope and Freedom to Iran. The reason I titled that Speaking Hope was because I spend quite a bit of my time in front of the computer on Skype or Facebook chat talking to my dear friends in Iran. They are important people in my life. Yeah, we talk on chat and we Skype, but they go beyond just being acquaintances. Some of them are very dear friends to me, and I've spent many hours just talking about things with them, the subject of freedom and the dreams they have for their life and the things they want to do. And many of my friends have had the opportunity to do work studies outside of Iran and travel to other countries. I have a friend right now named Zara who's doing a work study in Italy, and we have some very fun Skypes together. We talk about her days, her memories of Iran, where she visited some of the famous sites in Esfahan, and she talks about the architecture, the great history of Iran, the beauty of Iran, and we have really a lot of fun together talking about those great moments in her life. The reason I bring that up is because most of the time, the beauty, the history, the historical aspects of Iran are unfortunately overshadowed by the oppressive government we hear so much about in the news, and that I hear so much about from my friends as they try to find ways to cope with living under that fear. So the subject of an oppressive government sometimes overshadows the real beauty and the history of Iran that so many of my friends just love so much and truly wish that one day they can have a free Iran, so that Persian history and those beautiful sites we spend time talking about can take the forefront once again, instead of the news about executions and death and oppression by the Islamic regime there, that is the government. Tonight what I want to talk to you about is one of my dear friends I wrote a blog about, and it's very important that I share this with you because I feel like in many ways my friends have entrusted me with their personal lives and their stories so I can be a voice of hope for them. And that's what I try to do. Just about a year and a half ago, I wrote an important book, and this is the cover of it. It's called The Rose of Nowruz, Dreams of Hope and Freedom. The rose, a symbol of hope during the Persian New Year, that is Nowruz. And it's a fictional story in the sense of the word. The characters are fictional. It's the story of a young woman who is named Behera. She's a violinist, a very classically trained, very gifted violinist, who's taking part in a play in Iran, a very obscure type of play that talks about freedom. Of course, they have to do it in a very obscure way because otherwise the government would arrest them and put them in prison. But she takes part in this play, and she's the violinist character in the play. Well, one day, while she's practicing her song, she witnesses some pretty powerful things outside of her windows. She watched as the morality police, that is the Ghastir Shad, is busy dragging a woman away into a van. She's being very resistant to what they're doing, simply because she was in violation of the dress code. She was wearing something improper. Her hijab was not on right. She was showing too much skin. Maybe she had some makeup or nail polish on, which was inappropriate according to Islamic law when you go outside in public. She's being dragged away, and then finally the Ghastir Shad men, the morality police, begin beating her because she's resisting arrest. Well, when Behera witnesses this from the window in my story, it begins in her a desire to help her friends, to be an activist, a voice of hope and freedom in Iran for her friends, which are oppressed by a very difficult government that seems to want to control every aspect of their lives. Well, this book, The Rose of Nowruz, was really a landmark book, but it was based on the stories that my friends shared with me, eyewitness stories of what life is like there in Iran. And so I was really privileged to be able to sit down and compose this novel based on their stories they shared with me. And this book has been so kind to me. I've been able to share it with many human rights groups throughout Canada and Iran, and have really connected well with my friends in writing this book. Well, I spend a lot of time chatting with them or speaking with them on video chat as well. And just recently I talked to one of my friends, and she was able to do something very unique and different that none of my other friends could do. And what I mean by that is, on my radio program, I read the stories of my Iranian friends. They send me in an email. In this case, I interviewed one of my friends, and it wasn't an email that she sent me. I was able to video chat with her and Skype with her. And in doing so, when she explained to me the burdens in her life, the terror and the fear she has living in Iran, I could see those expressions on her face. And that was utterly unique. It had a great impact on me. It was more than just someone sending me an email. I could see in her eyes the hurt, the pain, the frustration. What I want to do with you on the brief time we have here together on the Cross in the Desert, I want to read my blog to you. This is my blog. You can get it at blogspot.com. It's called The Cross in the Desert, and most every one of my blogs is about the experiences of my friends in Iran. Others take on other subjects, perhaps with the subject of the Quran, Islam. I'll talk about that as well too. But most of my blogs are about personal experiences with my friends. And so what I like to do now is just kind of spend some time with you. I want to take you to my friend who lives in Shiraz. Now, I'm not going to mention her real name. I'm going to point this out to you in the blog. I changed her name to another common, maybe Arabic-type Iranian name, but this is not really her name. The reason for that is because it's for her own safety and protection. I don't want her to be known so well throughout the internet in relationship to this story, simply because it's very dangerous. The Iranian regime has ways of monitoring the people that live there through Facebook, and so it's not necessary that you know exactly who she is. That's something between me and her. But I want to read this to you. It's called Be Our Voice for Freedom. And I want to set the stage here. I remember maybe several years ago when I was in high school hearing about the book 1984. I've never personally sat down and read it cover to cover. But it's a book about government oppression and government control. And in this blog, I use an example of just what that's like, and I quote from the beginning of my blog. This is a page from George Orwell's book, 1984. Quote, "Always eyes watching you, and the voice enveloping you, asleep or awake, indoors or out of doors, in the bath or bed, no escape. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters in your skull." A quote from the book 1984 by George Orwell. Can you imagine living in a society where your every move and thought was monitored by the government? George Orwell's frightening novel, 1984, describes a society under the oppressive control of the government that prohibits free thought, sex, and any expression of individuality. They have even invented a language called Newspeak, which attempts to prevent political rebellion by eliminating any words relating to it. Even thinking rebellious thoughts is a crime, and citizens are constantly reminded, quote, "Big Brother is watching you." Well, the description of this kind of society is unfortunately a frightening reality for my dear Iranian friend. For security reasons, I will not mention her real name, but for the sake of my blog, I will call her Zara. Zara lives in Shiraz, Iran. She is divorced and has an 8-year-old boy and is struggling to raise him as a single mom. We're good friends. Regularly, we meet on Skype, and I spend time teaching her English in preparation for her exams at school. Recently, as we met on Skype, I asked Zara to talk about freedom and tell me exactly what life is like in Iran. Quote, "Iran is one big prison," unquote. Many of my Iranian friends have written short stories on the topic of freedom and have emailed them to me. I have featured their stories on my radio program and in my blogs. However, in this case, I was able to interview my friend and to watch her facial expressions as she described her struggle for freedom in Iran. This was dramatically different than just receiving an email, and it had an incredible emotional impact on me. Zara rolled her eyes as she talked about the subject of freedom. You could see the pain and frustration as she described her struggle for freedom in Iran. You could see in her eyes her countenance would change to despair. She explained that Iran was one big prison. Then suddenly, her face beamed with hope as she looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Randy, I want to be free like a bird in the sky." Quote, "Government chooses everything for us like a child," unquote. Zara is not a practicing Muslim, but just in name only. Her biggest objection to the Iranian way of life is the government determining what you should believe. Religion is personal, Zara says. The government doesn't have the right to tell you what to believe. This was Zara's biggest objection to me on Skype. I could see the bitterness and frustration in her eyes. Then she gazed intently into my eyes with a passionate stare. "Government chooses everything for us like a child. We don't have the right to choose." Zara paused for a moment and gathered her thoughts. Then she boldly proclaimed, "Freedom is our right. It is God's gift to us." I could not agree more. Iranians understand that freedom is a gift from God that has been stolen from them by a corrupt and power-hungry dictatorship. Quote, "Be our voice for freedom," unquote. As our brief interview came to a conclusion, I informed Zara that I would be having a book signing for my new publication in a few weeks and asked her what message I could give to my customers from her. A huge smile beamed across her face, and without hesitation, she immediately answered, "Tell them to please help us. We are prisoners here. Be our voice for freedom." I struggled to hold back the tears. I promised Zara I would do this for her and all of her Iranian friends. I asked her to type for me what she said in Farsi, and that I would make a poster of it and display it at my book signing. And this is what she said in Farsi. "Loftan be ma komak kunid, ma inja zandani hastim, loftan sadeya ma bashid barari azadi." And forgive me if I didn't say it exactly right. I'm not that well versed in Farsi. And what she meant to say, this is the English translation. "Please help us. We are prisoners here. Be our voice for freedom." Well, let me ask you this question. Can you hear the desperate cries from Zara's heart? It's a very simple request, and yet something you and I take way too much for granted every day. I intend to keep my promise to Zara. She's a dear friend that I pray one day will be like that bird flying in the sky as she described during our interview. There is a promise in Scripture that God indeed hears the desperate cries of Iranians. My prayer is that He will soon answer their cries and give them the precious gift of freedom. I want to show you the two particular pictures that are on my blog, if you could see them. A picture of a person's hands protruding out of a jail cell, and then this little picture here below it. "Relax, your government is in control." So sad. But I think the most important part of my blog, outside of the things that my friend shared with me that were on her heart, is the promise that God Himself gives in Scripture. This is very important. This is a psalm I've quoted many, many times to my Iranian friends, but I feel this is very, very important simply because it is a promise to them from the God of the universe. In Psalm 72, verses 12 through 14, God says, and He's speaking, of course, about Himself here. David is writing this psalm, and he's writing down the promise of God. Quote, "He will rescue the poor when they cry to Him. He will help the oppressed who have no one to defend them. He feels pity for the weak and needy, and he will rescue them. He will redeem them from oppression and violence, for their lives are precious to him. I love that last part of the sentence, that verse. Their lives are precious to him. Your life is precious to God, whether or not you realize that or believe that it truly is. He created you in his spiritual image and breathed in you the breath of life and gave you the freedom to choose. The very freedom to choose that my friend in Iran feels that there is such a struggle with. She is saying to all of us in this blog, the government chooses everything for us, treating us like a child. I want to be able to have the right to believe what I believe, to wear what I want to wear, is what my friend is saying. And yet the government makes that next to impossible, because if I choose to believe what I want to believe, if I choose to wear what I want to wear, I feel the wrath and the consequences of an oppressive government. And that's what my friend is crying out tonight in this blog. And God says he will rescue the poor when they cry to him. He will help the oppressed who have no one to defend them. And he feels pity for them. And he will redeem them because their lives are precious to him. This is a promise that God says he will do. I constantly remind my friends when I talk with them, blog with them, if I share with them on Skype, that one day that reality of freedom will be before their eyes. That they will indeed be able to walk down the streets of Tehran, to wear and believe what they choose to believe. And then when I think of the great beauty of Iran, the history of Iran, the things that Iranians cling to so much, I think of one day that real history of Iran will return to them. It will mean so much more to them, like it did years and years ago before the revolution. These are places in Iran that are very pivotal. And one of the things that I think is very ironic is that one of the greatest pieces of archaeology is the Cyrus cylinder from the great King Cyrus of Persia thousands of years ago. Engraved on this cylinder is one of the first charters of human rights. And even though King Cyrus reigned over the Persians, he gave them freedom. They were not complete slaves to him. He granted them dignity, beliefs, and freedom that Iranians don't have today. And my question is, what has happened to the regime that they have forgotten the historical roots of their own country? The Cyrus cylinder, the first charter of human rights, treated the Persians with more dignity than they're being treated today. What I would just ask you to do is to pray for my friends in Iran, to remember them in your prayers and in your thoughts and in your speaking out. And if you desire to learn more about what I do with Iranians, just come to my Facebook page and friend request me. My name is Randy L. Noble. You can reach me there. I'll be glad to be your friend on Facebook. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening about my friends in Iran. God bless you, and I will see you soon again on the cross in the desert.